Session one for everybody. 1A, 1B, 1C. He said, yes, start. Put up your video, put up your mic, please. It's critical. Put up.
Wenn der Otumba im Ort erschien, grüßten ihn alle. Er war der Hofmarschall des Königs. Otun Oba heißt des Königs der Hand.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Hey, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. Man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. Man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi. suffer pass. Not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time for us to start. We would like the host who is sharing the screen to stop sharing the screen as we get started. Thank you very, very, very much. Well, good afternoon, good morning, and I don't know, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. Welcome to the first of 3 panels that are holding at this year's Legal Studies Association conference, celebrating Jonathan Haynes, who is a giant and a pioneer in Nollywood studies. In fact, to use Nigerian terminology, he is a big Iroko tree under whose many branches all of us present today have been able to find some research shade, very good shade. So we are all delighted to be here today. I'm happy that all our 4 participants in the on the first of these 3 panels, which will be taking place, are here. And I don't want to take more time, cut into the presentations of each of the panelists. They are all distinguished scholars in their own right. So I'm just going to go straight ahead and we'll be following the order of the program. I'll give a very tiny introduction for each person and then call on them to speak for somewhere in the region of 15 minutes. And if you go over that, I will actually speak up because that's the only way to get your attention. I will say something not very pleasant, I don't know, that will get your attention. So thank you very much. So our very first speaker for today is Alessandro Jedlowski, who is a media anthropologist and coordinator of the Chaire Diaspora Africaine of the Bordeaux Institute of Political Sciences in France. So over to you, Alessandro.
Thank you very much, Maria Dewin. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to have the opportunity to say something in honor of our dear friend John. I'm super tired these days because I have a newborn at home and I'm spending a lot of sleepless nights. So I'll read my text rather than just trying to improvise so that I can keep the time and also trying to make sense. Before talking about more serious academic matters, I have to say how grateful I am to John. Our friendship started in a somehow odd way at the margins of a Nollywood conference in Germany. I was just beginning my PhD research on Nigerian films. And I was naively trying to find someone who could co-supervise my research informally, as no one in my university knew much about Southern Nigeria or African cinema. And to put it bluntly, I was a bit lost. Chatting over some beers, only the first of a few crates we drank over the years, John agreed to discuss the possibility of supervising my work. And this quite literally opened up the world of Nollywood studies to me. Chatting with John and other Nollywood scholars that night, including Ono, who was one of the organizers of that conference, I realized how incredible was the work that John had contributed to achieve, together, of course, with Ono and many others in Nigeria and across the world. They created a very special niche in our turbulent academic world, a niche in which being a scholar is fun. And this is, in my view, a bit unique. In so many disciplines and research groups, scholars spend more time fighting than discussing. But at least in my view, John, Ono, and the other forerunners of Nollywood studies, including Moradewun and Brian, who are also here today, managed to create a benevolent space where friendship and intellectual complicity are stronger than the precarity of our academic lives. Discussing John's feedback about my thesis while drinking icy beers on his sailing boat along Long Island shores have certainly contributed to my positive impression about this field of studies. But the more time I spend doing research, the more I think that this friendly, collaborative atmosphere is precious and should be preserved, despite the neoliberal transformation of both Nollywood and the academia that we witnessed over the past few years. This said, let me go to the more serious stuff. The work John has produced on Nollywood is monumental, and it is not an easy task to discuss it in original ways, particularly in front of an audience who has read most of it and probably knows it better than I do. My intention in the next few minutes is to try to highlight a few thematic lines in John's work that can contribute to scholarship well beyond Nollywood and African cinema. As many of us have already said in various ways in the past, despite the wealth of original and innovative experiences and ideas that have emerged in the field of African screen media over the past few years, this object of study and the scholarship about it have remained marginal in film and media studies curricula worldwide. But this doesn't mean that serious work on African media, like John's, doesn't have important and original things to offer to global media studies. Quite to the contrary, my impression is that the future of media studies, its future concepts and theories, is to be made, at least partly, in Africa, on the ground of the analysis of African realities and on their universal relevance. John's work on Nollywood spans over more than 25 years, and this is the point I want to start from. Within an academic context marked by the volatility of research funding and the imperative of hyperproduction and diversification, John's work offers an important methodological lesson and an instructive example, which is valuable for scholars working on media well beyond Nigeria and Africa. Solid research can be achieved only with time and patience on the ground of trust and mutual respect that is established with industry insiders over the years. It requires the fine understanding of the society in which production takes place, and not only the knowledge of the industry and the films it produces. John's first contribution to global media studies then is, in my view, a strong call for qualitative long-term research, for a kind of open-ended, non-dogmatic ethnographic approach that combines deep knowledge of the social and cultural texture of film production and circulation environments to the careful and knowledgeable analysis of film contents and aesthetics. This is an openly interdisciplinary and inductive approach that shows the importance of overcoming disciplinary boundaries in both theoretical and methodological terms to follow the meaning that emerges from the social phenomenon that we study. Beyond this methodological dimension, there are several contributions that, in my view, John's work on Nollywood can offer to ongoing debates in film and media studies. In order to stick to the time that has been given to me, I will focus only on a few main points, even if several others could be mentioned. The first point I want to make concerns the existing debates about what the word new in new media theory means, a question that is also related to the debates around the concept of post-cinema that emerged in the field of film studies over the past couple of decades. If in the late 90s and early 2000s, the optimism regarding the introduction of new digital technologies led some scholars to see these technologies as inaugurating a radical break with the past, more recent studies have been more careful. They underline the specific historicity of each technological innovation, as well as the fragmented nature of technological development in different regions of the planet and across different social classes. Several scholars have shown how the notion of new media is vitiated by linear vision of technological innovation and by an epistemological positioning that can be defined as presentist, in the sense that it focused predominantly on present transformation and is unable to put into light the dynamics of historical continuity and discontinuity that characterize today's phenomena. Within this context, the emergence of the term post-cinema has revived the debate on what actually constitutes cinema as a medium, leading some scholars to read the progressive marginalization of cinema theaters as the inexorable sign of the end of cinema with a capital C. In relation to these debates, John's work on Nollywood offers several valuable elements for developing an alternative critical position. First of all, together with other Nollywood scholars, John described Nollywood as an industry that emerged thanks to a specific technological innovation, the videotape. A technological innovation that in Nigeria, as in many other sub-Saharan African countries, played a somewhat more disruptive role than the digital technologies that were introduced later. The role of videotape in the development of Nollywood prompts us to interrogate the sense of the term new in new media, forcing us to focus on the specific social, cultural, historical, and geographical elements that define the impact of technological innovation in different contexts. Basically, what is new, where and when, and how impactful is innovation on processes of media production and circulation depends on several factors, and John's work shows this in poignant ways. Secondly, as John's work has shown, Nollywood has structured itself as a self-sufficient and economically sustainable industry by developing a hybrid media format and focusing on a specific economic strategy, straight-to-video distribution, in a context in which cinemas were disappearing as a result of the economic crisis that hit Nigeria in the 80s and 90s, and the consequent growth of social insecurity. Nollywood has therefore established itself as a small-screen cinema industry in which videotapes and video recorders play the role of collective rather than individualistic technologies. If in the literature that focuses on Western case studies, the success of the videotape has been seen as related mainly to its capacity to free the spectator from the tyranny of television schedules, transforming the TV screen into a personal cinema. In Nigeria, the success of this technology has been linked to other factors. For instance, as John, together with Brian and other Nollywood scholars, has shown, the videotape favored the great popular success of Nollywood through piracy, but perhaps even more by triggering the development of neighborhood video clubs, a phenomenon that Ono, among others, has studied. These examples show that Nollywood videos have been consumed in most cases in ways that are more reminiscent of movie theaters rather than in the individualized modes that characterize the use of videotapes in Western contexts. In this sense, the analysis of the Nollywood experience presented in John's work show how complex it is to define the key attributes of what we call cinema. It shows that the fluidity and hybridity of this medium is not a recent phenomenon linked to the digital innovation, but a constitutive reality of the medium itself. In relation to the debate on post-cinema, it is also interesting to know that the Nollywood example shows itself to be, from an empirical point of view, in strong contrast with the Western realities on which the post-cinema literature is grounded. As John's work has shown, in a context in which access to a fast and constant internet connection remains a privilege limited to the urban elite, but in which distribution on videotape or DVD has now become obsolete as in much of the rest of the world, the cinema theater, the multiplex, as well as the small neighborhood theater hall continues to be considered as one of the ideal distribution strategies. If theaters in the rest of the world keep on closing, in Nigeria, theaters continue to be built even after the COVID crisis. As the examples that I made highlight, then the specificity of the Nigerian technological infrastructure context makes it possible to relativize the radical contrast between old and new media. Scholars who focus their analysis on the global spread of new digital technologies often imply the consequent marginalization of older media, television sets, cinema theaters, and so on. But the Nigerian examples discussed in John's work point to a more complex reality. If the aforementioned return of cinemas in Nigeria goes already in this direction, the commercial trajectory of the streaming platform Iroko TV, started by John among others, is equally interesting for this discussion. In more than 10 years, and after having raised several tens of millions of dollars in investment, this company has become the world leader in the streaming of African and particularly Nigerian contents. However, its economic sustainability is almost entirely due to the diasporic market. In Africa, its development, as we all know, has been slowed down by local infrastructural difficulties, including particularly the lack of a stable supply of electricity. factor that forced, and this is interesting for what I'm trying to say, the company to focus on older technologies, for example, by developing partnership with television companies such as Canal Plus and StarTimes, or to try to distribute contents, developing hybrid distribution strategies like distributing contents via USB sticks or Bluetooth transfer for Nollywood, for Nigerian audiences. These examples demonstrate how the path of technological innovation, which new media theory often implicitly considers as progressive and linear, is much more bumpy and tortuous, and some old technologies can remain valid, sometimes even advantageous, even in contexts such as the Nigerian one, in which the most recent technologies are available and widely disseminated. In fact, it should not be forgotten that Nigeria is one of the most connected countries in Africa, but for the moment, this factor had little impact on the developments of streaming platforms as sustainable avenues for the local distribution of Nigerian contents. Beyond the points that I just raised, much more could be said about the impact and significance of John's work. A particular mention should be made, for instance, of the importance of John's work on genres in Nollywood and its particular relevance within the field of African cinema, a field in which genres have only recently begun to be adopted as a prism to understand the variety of the screen media forms that have historically emerged in the continent. For his tireless efforts to give to specific influential Nollywood authors the right visibility within a field of scholarship, Nollywood studies, that have often given to the phenomenon, Nollywood, more importance than to the individuals who made it happen. Here I decided subjectively to focus on some aspects that have been particularly relevant for my own work. I'm sure that we will have the occasion to dig much deeper and wider in John's work in the rest of these and other two panels in honor of John. As for me, I can but hand here by cheering John, hoping to have soon an opportunity to meet again in Lagos, possibly, and having a couple of good cold stars together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Thank you for keeping to time. For members of the audience, we will take all our questions and comments at the end. Alessandro had a very interesting presentation on cinema and the understanding of new and old technologies as we think about Nollywood studies. And one important thing that Alessandro mentioned, having fun. When the Nollywood crowd has met at different conferences in different locations around the world, we have always had fun. And even though we're only meeting virtually today, let's try and have some fun. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Brian Larkin, who is a professor of anthropology and director of graduate studies at Barnard College and at Columbia University in New York. And Brian, it's your turn now, and you have 15 minutes as well.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Moradewa. And it is a pleasure to be here. It's great to be invited to this panel. I'm hoping to see all the panels. I feel lucky to have met John, to have been a fellow traveler along the paths that he and Ono opened up. They've certainly been central to my intellectual and personal life. So I think that these panels are great, and Lagos is perhaps the best place for having this. Though I first met John in the North in the mid-90s. He was teaching for the year at ABU Zaria. This was at the tail end of the debate around political economy. ABU was a hotbed for these debates at that time. And both he and Ono were already working on issues of cinema. And I think all of us were probably trained in that tradition of cultural imperialism, in that tradition of political economy, you know, in the debates around African cinema as they were at the time. And it seems like a world away now. You know, those debates seem like a different reality. Certainly film in Africa is a different reality. And it's been a long sort of movement from those times. This is because I think Nigerian film in particular has been remarkably explosive. Technically, aesthetically, socially, it just grows incredibly. And we just had graduation here in New York, and a student of mine who's Indian graduated as a senior, and in her first year as a freshman, she took a class I teach on Nollywood and Bollywood. It's about popular cinemas. And when I think of the class as I taught it then and how I would teach it if I taught it today, I can't even believe the amount of change in her short time at university. I remember scrambling to try and get films. You had to get films from Nigeria. I think at that point, at best, Lionheart was the only film you could get on Netflix. And generally you were searching everywhere. Now, if you teach the film, the presence of Nigerian cinema easily available to anyone, it's just remarkable. And it gives us a sense, if we think of the movement from home videos, what do we call it? Home videos, Nigerian video film, Nollywood. Think of the movement from VHS cassettes to VCDs to DVDs to downloaders, Africa Magic, streaming services. The constant mutation of what it's been has been really a long and uninterrupted change, where Nigerian film has developed, and as it's developed, it's diversified. And so I think in that sense, I've always thought the phenomenon of Nigerian film tends to outstrip the intellectual language we have to talk about it. We tend to be chasing the phenomenon. And at the front of this, John and Ono, in related ways, have been there retooling how it is we can think about it, how it is we discuss it. So in that sense, it's best to hold all fixed opinions loosely, to realize that what we claim today might have no relevance tomorrow. But at the same time, I also think these issues recur. And I do think in some of John's recent writing and Alessandra Moradewan's recent writing, we're returning to questions of political economy. We're turning to questions of ownership, to questions of indigenous film production versus external sponsorship of that, questions that were classic to the rise of political economy at that point. So, so I'm going to go, I was once on another panel and I wrote something about John's early work, which I'm now going to repeat, and certain people here have heard, but partly because it remains so stunningly relevant. And partly not just for how we think about John's work, but how we think about film and its relationship to a broader social and economic life. So John's a literature scholar, and his early work with Ono was the book looking at Yoruba cinema, looking at African cinema at that point, and Yoruba cinema was easily the most dynamic, inventive, different form of cinema that existed in Africa at that point. As a literature scholar, I think he and Ono, they're trained to analyze film form, trained to analyze film content, but the nature of Nigerian film always pushed that. This is why Ono writes on street corner viewing. This is why John had to write about distribution and exhibition. How do you take these films around? Who is this person who's a producer and a director and an exhibitor all at the same time? It pushes people to go beyond film form, to look at these different sets of issues. And this happened early with Nigerian cinema, but I think it's marked all of Nollywood, and it marks John's earlier work. And this is when I want to go to his first work on restoration drama, particularly on the literature of Ben Jonson and what that period of life was, which, as I keep thinking about it, just after the Civil War, a time of incredible religious tension with, fears about Catholics and tensions between Catholics and Protestants, the sort of emergence of a new form of capitalism, the sort of dynamics there are remarkably similar to certain dynamics we have in post-Civil War Nigeria. So with that, I want to look at John's analysis of Bartholomew Fair, which is a play first performed in 1614. So that's a long time ago. Fairs then were markets, but they were also these calendrical rituals where you had all forms of entertainments going on. People would play music, they would gamble, you have acrobatics, there would be dancing, sexual encounters, people would eat. It's a place where different social classes mixed. It was effectively a culture produced by ordinary people for ordinary people. And it emerged from the folk in that sense. These are oftentimes cultural forms that were not official, they were not elite, they were about the body, about sensory experience. And it was festive, it was carnivalesque, as people, Bakhtin famously has come to theorize. And John's interest then was, these spaces are not explicitly political, but they offer a space outside of official culture, where oftentimes official culture is held up to ridicule or debate or mocking or discussion or envy or desire, that sort of mixture of things. Is it a critique? Is it not a critique? We both want to ape this wealth, but we also want to mock this wealth. And here I think what was classically true for John in thinking about Ben Jonson has been true all through his career, which is, how do we understand the nature of these as political texts? Where do we locate political critique. We can't just go to an African cinema style of old style political critique because it doesn't quite work. There are parts of Nollywood that has always been immensely conservative and parts of Nollywood that's also been immensely egalitarian. Then where do we find that? How do we pass it out? So the play Bartholomew Fair itself was about the disintegration of that way of life. And this is the marketplace itself was disappearing. You had the emergence of shops, the first shops where you go inside a shop to buy something, as opposed to going to the older outside marketplace. You have the rise of the theater. So instead of performance being in public, like masquerades or like music in public, where you throw someone some money, you now have to pay to enter into a purpose-built building and see this new theatrical performance, which is at an elite level. As the marketplace lessens in importance, so did the forms of sociality that go with it, the older traditions of laughter or mockery or egalitarianism that get changed by the emergence of a new economy. So John was writing, his interest in Bartholomew Fair was exactly about this transition. And it struck me when I was reading this before, I stay with this, but then he's interested in the end of the marketplace, in the rise of new forms of privatized consumption and how this potentially tames the transgressive aspects of popular culture. And if we look at the rise of new Nollywood, if we look at the rise of the multiplex, we're looking at the movement away from Asaba, the open market, to the privatized space of the shopping mall. And then the anxiety again, will new Nollywood offer certain things for Nigerian cultural production, but will it also potentially tame those transgressive, excessive, slightly embarrassing, but still interesting aspects of Asaba films or old Nollywood or whatever we talk about it. So I find that interesting in that this work on restoration drama has huge overlaps with research on Nigerian film, because it really speaks to what cultural production does at moments of transition. What is the relationship between cultural production, like cinema, and new forms of economy? This was a classic question of political economy. What's the relationship of it to social life? How do we understand what these different transitions are? And John had this quote about Ben Jonson as a playwright. So he's thinking about a 17th century playwright. And it's a quote that could easily have been made about Kunle Afolayan, about Izu Juku, about others. So this is a quote from John directly. Jonson obviously felt for certain aspects of the popular tradition, but he was also alive to everything in that tradition that was moldy, stale, crude, and outmoded. He built his career more clearly than anyone ever had on the assumption that the future lay with a new kind of artist, a figure that Jonson himself was busy constituting. This figure was articulated in the language of humanism, and perhaps its central feature was a personal autonomy that traditional society could not support, but the emerging capitalist society could. So here's a tension. It's about loss, it's about gain. It's a tension at the heart of Nigerian cinema. When do you make a film addressed directly to the needs and desires of a popular audience? When do you make a film that pushes those desires, that realizes the artistic ambition of the director or the writer or the producer, but which might threaten more traditional values? In which direction do you go? Which way should you go? I think, these are signal arguments have always accompanied African film. Excuse me one second, I just want to get to my time. Because they really, what lessons do we draw from it? The last 2 decades in Nigeria has seen an explosion of creativity across a range of domains, from art to film to music to literature, and all the institutional fora in which they thrive: film festivals, multiplexes, biennials, exhibitions, streaming services, from Spotify through to Netflix. And in this, Nigerian artists, musicians, writers, curators, filmmakers, programmers have been active and central. It must be the most dynamic period of Nigerian cultural life, at least since the 1970s, perhaps ever. And certainly Nigeria has this place in worldwide media that was almost incomprehensible. Nigerian literature and writers are central to world literature. Nigerian curators and Nigerian artists are central to world art, not African art, but MoMA or the Metropolitan Museum of Art anywhere. And that's been a struggle to assert that. People like Okwuenwezor led that struggle. And Nigerian film has clearly been at the center of this. But with this, then you get a debate. What is the appropriate nature of this? What's the appropriate form of African cultural production? And I'm going to switch briefly to, a recent article that Moses Achonu wrote in Africa as a Country, in which he takes to task platitudinous Western commentary that are reluctant to criticize the failures of African governments. And he's really talking about, journalists, experts, academics, who in the name of championing Africa often end up minimizing, even celebrating conditions of governance, infrastructure, urban informality that they never would in their own territory. And this is an argument that's common to Nollywood. Is Nollywood at the beginning, not now, but at the beginning, a plucky example of African invention and creativity and experimentation? Or is it kitsch? And so Moses Achonu is making the argument, you have to draw a fine line between celebration and condescension. There's a fine line between recognizing sort of genuine achievement, but also failing to offer critique when it is deserved. And this is because it's not obvious to know. But I think partly behind this is, if you look at, I don't know, and so I think about this because myself in my own work, I think this a lot. So I wrote an early piece on the rise of video film infrastructure and things like this. And I was interested in making an argument about Nollywood, and that we can see creativity, experimentation, not just in the films themselves, but in the infrastructures and the systems of distribution that circulate them. And there we can find a lot of invention, as much invention there as in the films itself. But others will come along and say, well, when you celebrate this, you'll celebrate these images you would never tolerate on your own television, you would never accept in your own cinemas. So you're praising over here. I mean, I think Ono made this point early on as well. So how do we deal with this? And I think the reason we have to continually deal with it is partly because behind that is a debate about what's the appropriate form of production, therefore the appropriate modern subject. We had a debate. I brought over Daniel Oriahi to have a debate around, to screen his film Taxi Driver, and he had a debate immediately on the stage with his partner Grace Agu, which was about how should you make films? And he was saying, well, you need to make films that have good camera angles, that are technically efficient, that are really good. And then his wife on stage in front of him says, look, no, you make films, you care about camera angles. Western film festivals care about camera angles, but Nigerians, we don't care about camera angles. We care about story. And she has a longer history in Nollywood than he does. And so they had this debate on stage. Now, it's not as if they're opposed, they're a partner, they're a couple, but nonetheless, it's a tension. And this is a tension because as Nigerian cultural production is diversified, Nigeria is a big, messy, complicated country. And not everyone in it wants the same thing. And so as these debates have not gone away, the debate between what African cinema had versus Nollywood, versus the new Nollywood versus old Nollywood, they will come back to this larger question of what are the stakes of culture? Why does culture count? What is the appropriate direction to go? And I think in the earlier work on Ben Jonson, John is directly addressing these issues. And it's remarkable to me that they continue through in contemporary debate about African cinema. And in that sense, Nollywood keeps changing, but we will have to have these debates because they're always live. And they're always about how do we understand the relationship of media to politics, to a changing economy, and to an emergent cultural world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. You finished just in time. And apologies to everyone. We're discussing media and technology, and my own internet just dropped in California. So this is not just something that happens only in Nigeria. It happens everywhere. I'm literally in Silicon Valley, but my internet just dropped. But thank you, Brian. And you continued part of that theme about the contrast between the old and the new and how we respond to that. And you also reminded us that John has had 1 million research lives. I mean, he studied this, he studied that, he studied this other thing, So this is really quite remarkable. I think this will all make for very interesting conversation as we continue. So our next speaker is Dr. Folakemi Ogungbe, who is head of the Digital Media Unit at the Nigerian Film Institute in Jos. At least that's what I found online. It may be old. I hope it's still relevant.
It is, but maybe not in this context, but it is relevant.
Okay, thank you very much. So over to you. You have 15 minutes as well. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. I am so happy to be here. Seated with giants and Nollywood studies. I am really happy. I'm presenting at the same time. I'm learning a lot in the panel, and it's interesting to be here. And to our, will I call you grandfather now? I hope I'm not embarrassing you. Thank you so much for all the work you have done in Nollywood studies. Thank you for creating platforms for people like me to stand on, because a part of my PhD thesis was, about epic films, and I was trying to move away from it, not move away from it. I wasn't sure what to do. Thank you for opening up, all the conversations that you've had. And thank you for the way you write. You make it so relatable. It's almost as if you're reading fiction. You make it very, very, very relatable. And yet it's still grounded in very, STEM, the deep scholarly intervention. Thank you so much for all you've been doing. So I'm going to be talking about the Nollywood epic in Jonathan Haynes' scholarship. I'll be part reading and part, discussing. This topic will be coming from his book, Nollywood, the Creation on Film Genres. And he dedicated a chapter to the cultural epic that is representing the past. Obviously, the classification epic, like say, came accidentally. Like Jonathan Haynes said, it came when the book of Musaga produced by Onyokoye was being promoted, and that word was used severally, and it became, the sobriquet for such films. So this chapter talked about a subtopic to impact to the here he was talking about how most of the epic films were made in the East because it was cheaper than Lagos, and the films were categorized as epic because they were immediately recognizable. Once you see thatched villages, you see piers, sometimes fanciful costumes, you know automatically that you're watching an epic film. It's situated. It told us that two films to conceptualize the genre, which is the Battle of Mutsanga and Igodo. And they also spoke about spirituality, settings, the dancing, the singing, the drumming, the flute, and as well as generic instabilities. But there are two subtopics that I find really interesting and kind of form a basis for my PhD research. The two subtopics are authenticity in epic films and history as a subject. So Jonathan Haynes stated that, epic films work at historical and cultural, some epic films work at historical and cultural accuracy, while some don't. Although he said that the lack of accuracy didn't stop the epic film from expressing social and psychological desires, nor did it stop it from creating a viable past in the imagination of the audience. But I still find it somehow like some historical films work at, accuracy, while some don't. It's a cause of concern for me. And that was what I mused about a lot when I was writing my thesis. So I tried to explore the genre of the historical film, and I was trying to separate it from the epic film, which would mean any and all films that has a semblance of the past, especially any, like I said earlier, with a village setting or with some gray out, visual in the coloring, doing editing, which many Nollywood flashback scenes use. So I thought of the historical film genre in both broader and narrower terms, rather in the sense that it doesn't limit itself to the Nollywood as found in southeast of Nigeria, which is as described as coming from maybe the traditions of Ubatogundes, Aye and Jaye Sime, or Dio Fagunwa Sobojo Odeminu Igborumole, which has been translated as The Forest of a Thousand Demons. I thought of newer films such as October 1, Half of a Yellow Sun, commercial films that actually import history into fiction and create what I've called, or what I am calling, I don't know whether I'm the one calling it that, but I don't know whether I can claim to be the one, but what I can call the historical film genre. Now, in the narrower sense, I thought of the historical film genre as any or all Nollywood. Okay, so let's move quickly now. Now, Jonathan Haynes stated that he agrees that the lack of accuracy is regrettable as Nigeria has an endless variety of culture, all of whose traditional forms are being eroded by urbanization, intolerant versions of world religion, and Western education. He, however, praised today Kelani, a foremost Nigerian producer of historical and Yoruba-centric Nigerian films, who places premium on quality research and content. Now there is a large compendium of Nollywood films that fall into the class of the epic film. Ajina, only Kajina has said, spoke about Charles Novia, Fred Amata, Laszlo Maswen, Boderua, who experimented generously with the genre. And then while she was referring to Charles Novia, she described epic as alternatives to historical film, which are largely fictional, but which the viewing audience tends to refer to as history because they are set in rural areas during the pre-colonial times. Now, this Angina's intervention brings to fore my fear on how the epic film can socialize the populace wrongly. Many times because of the fact that the film is popular culture and because it is an audiovisual medium and like we say, it's democratic, it can reach a lot of people. Sometimes the people take it as history, which is misleading. History as a subject is probably taken more seriously at the tertiary level in Nigeria than in the formal, secondary school education, as even the subject was banned some time ago. And then even the kind of history that is being taught in the schools is being questioned because it's called the history of the Europeans in Africa, the history that Mongopang founded the Niger River and on like that. So this miseducation and general nonchalance of the government and the populace to history may make the viewing audience gravitate towards fictional representation of the past that has very little or no bearing with history and call it their history. Now, I appreciate the value of epic film as a genre, as an entertainment model, and as an art form. But my worry is that certain anachronistic elements are seen as facts. I recently spoke to Tunde Kelani about his film Ayinla. I was not born during the time that Ayinla lived, but I listened to his music a couple of times, not so much for the lyrics, but more for the rhythm. I therefore took the Ayinla that Tunde Kelani gave us on screen as the Ayinla that lived before I was born. So I was therefore shocked when I spoke with Tunde Kelani and he informed me that the film is intertwined with several fabricated stories, but he sought out the believability of the work, the verisimilitude, by aligning the story to the lyrics of Ayinla's songs. This is very clever and very creative, but I was hoping so badly that the Tunde Kelani version that he was giving me was the truth. But I just told Tunde Kelani that, well, that has become my truth. I mean, the Ayinla you presented to me is the Ayinla that I know, and is the Ayinla, I don't want to think about any other Ayinla. That Ayinla is fine for me. So I had the opportunity to speak to the filmmaker, but thousands of film viewers may not have this opportunity and live with the image that the filmmaker has created about the past. Another instance was narrated by Foluke Ogunleye in our 2007 book, where a monument of Efun Seto Aniwura was to be mounted at Challenge Roundabout in Ibadan. She reports that there was a revolt as the representation of Efushetu Aniwura that has been presented by Kiwumi Shola as a heartless slave trader. Nobody wanted to relate with that. So at the end of the day, the statue was mounted, but it was not called Efushetu Aniwura. It was just called a generic Iyalode of Ibadan, who could be anybody. So because they didn't want that, so they did that just to placate the angry community. So the community are taking Akiwumi Shola's representation of Efushetu Aniwura as their own truth. So I move on now, and of course, Rosetta Stone has talked about the historical film, that it must seek to engage critically the discourse of history. The filmmaker must peruse the existing body of knowledge on historical interest in order to make a valid commentary about the past. White has also spoken about it, that cinema and video, as well as other audiovisual means, must tackle the subject of history better because of their unique medium. He's talking about the fact that they're audiovisual, so you can show a landscape, atmosphere, or a scenic representation of the past, and as well as reveal even complex mechanisms and emotions, like wars and battles and so on. Ndu Maureen is telling us that we should be careful about the kind of images we put out there, especially for people for children or young people in diaspora, who would probably take some of the things that they see in the films as their truth. And interestingly, Nigerian in diaspora about a population of about 17 million people, which is equitable to a small nation. So attention has to be paid to the socio-cultural needs, of Nigerians, even in diaspora. So now, Haynes also agrees with me because he stated that for some middle-class kids growing up in Nigerian cities, epics are more powerful in actual fact in shaping their imagination of history than anything they learn, or than the occasional brief trips to their ancestral village where they are apt to regard as just counting or amused with their ethnic devices. So because of the images, because they are audiovisual images, they stay with you for a long time. So Olabanji Akinola also talked about that. He was even talking about rebranding of the nation and all of that. Then we come to Igwe problematization, which Jonathan Haynes spoke about a lot in the chapter. There are several issues with verisimilitude with many epic films, as I've said. The Igbos are known to be without a king, but Nollywood has created kings. For the Igbos, it's Igwe, and it's looming large in the Nigerian society because in the churches we sing about God being an Igwe. The football fans in the Southwest call Thierry Henry the Igwe of football. So it's already with us. We can't throw it away again. And it's Nollywood that gave us this truth that has become our own. So, of course, he talked about filming an historical film. It costs of money. Make a realistic film. I even mean you are going to get return on investment. Spoke about King Jaja of Opobo with a cast of about 1,500 people, official crew of 44, which was a big budget film by Nigerian standards. Haynes also said the film strived for historical accuracy, but did not make so much money in the box office. So while I tried to differentiate a bit between what Jonathan Haynes calls epic and the Nigerian historical film by a set of definitions. I call a historical film a film about Nigerians' past. This could be pre-colonial, colonial, or post-colonial, where there is a deliberate consciousness to reenact the past by paying attention to minute details such as the scenery, the set, the costume, the history, the language, but in which there is also adequate room for creativity and entertainment. It's still a mix. It is a mix, but let us see the film's dialogue with history and not some fiction or something that doesn't just exist. It could also be a film where the narrative is about a specific event, place, hero or heroine in the past, dramatically captured in the film medium. It could be a film set in a particular period in past. I'm very, very interested in stating that particular period in the past, because some of these epic films, you don't even know what history they are talking about. Is it pre-colonial? What history are they really talking about? It's just an imagined past. It is an art form, I agree, but when the people begin to see it as their truth, then we have to be a little bit careful. So, like I said, navigating through a sea of epic dramas.
Your time is almost up. Just to interrupt.
Okay. So I'll just
1 minute more.
Okay, so I will just round up now and say the Nollywood epic is a popular art form and an accepted genre among the Nollywood audience and in Nollywood studies. And I want to thank Professor Jonathan Haynes for situating the epic genre firmly in Nollywood studies and giving opportunity to someone like me to build on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Taking us in a slightly different direction with a discussion on genres and on the epic, which is sure to kind of generate a lively conversation. Our last speaker, and not the least, is Onokome Okome, who is a professor in the English and Film Studies Department at the University of Alberta, Canada, but more importantly, a fellow pioneer, a fellow co-founder of Nollywood Studies. So we are happy to have him speak today. Thank you so much, Ono.
Okay, indeed, I didn't want to miss this. So I got back from Nigeria only last night, so my voice is still bad. But I really wanted to be here. And so I woke up really early to think through the things I wanted to say. I will leave out all of the notes that not all of the notes, but a large chunk of the notes that I made. And I will also leave out those very, very wonderful evenings of whiskey and beer and listening to Johnny Lee Hooker. I will leave out all of this because they will form a later part of the kinds of writing that I will do when I'm retired. As that main character in Godfather used to say, makes all of these big gestures go away. So I'll let them go for now. But I would like to talk about something that I will return to later in my life here as an academic, which is the making of the scholarship of Nollywood, how the scholarship of Nollywood evolved. And the point I want to make, because I'm not going to be reading my notes, and is to simply say that John was at the center of it and deeply connected to the making of the scholarship, as well as, in a sense, what Nollywood study has become. So when the proper history of the scholarship of Nollywood is written, it hasn't been written yet, the proper history of that. A lot has been written, and many of what been written so far really great, but that aspect of Nollywood study is yet to be contextualized and made very, very readable to Nollywood scholars, and indeed to scholars in cultural studies in general. In other words, when this is done, Jonathan Haynes will be duly acknowledged, because there will be no option but to do this. But he will be acknowledged not just because of what he's written, which is great, which you cannot doubt the depth and integrity of what is written, but he'll be also acknowledged for something else. That is the way that he carried on doing his job consistently, with passion and with integrity. His scholarship, therefore, is an obvious thing. But I do think it is the indirectness of his influence on the subject and the people who took over after he's cleared the field, so to speak, that will matter a whole lot when that history is written. We met, if my memory from that time serves me good, we met in 1994. I think it was in Port Harcourt at an American Studies conference. He had just arrived in Nigeria, and he was feeling his way into Nigerian literature and culture, trying to get a handle of things. He did, and he did so quickly. My sense then, and even now, is that he caught on quickly with this project that he wanted to do, because he was unassuming, very much so unassuming about what he wanted, but much more because he did not take anything for granted. He didn't come to the Nigerian culture with preconceived notions, as we always. That's something we find always with people from the scholars from the outside. When we met in Port Harcourt, I was barely 3 years into my post-PhD life. In many ways, he was already an established academic with 2 books on Renaissance literature. Who could fault that? But his disposition was that of an academic willing to learn to know new things, to learn about a new culture, to study people, and to do so quietly and with a calm disposition that attracts you to him about all the things he did at that point. He was always learning. Even if I did not find that attitude new, because I had some mentors too at the University of Ibadan who taught me how to behave that way, even though I didn't quite do that the way they wanted me to, but they taught me that. So even if I didn't find that attitude new or curious for that matter, I did find it exceptional for a man who's been everywhere and has done really great things in the scholarly world. It was a draw for me. And we struck a friendship. 4 years later, we had the good luck of writing, of securing a Rockefeller grant to Bellagio in Italy, where we worked really hard, very hard indeed, to write that paper. Perhaps the very first serious academic paper on Nollywood. So it was here that we hammered out the first serious contemplation on Nollywood, which then appeared in Research in African Literature as Evolving Popular Culture, Nigerian Video Film. It appeared in the fall edition of that journal in 1998. For me, that paper is still as relevant as it was in 1998 as it is today. Going through it again, about days ago, I felt that a lot of the things that we're still talking about, the debates that we're still dealing with today, were all represented at that, or rather, they all represented in that essay. And I think that we will have good reasons in the coming months and years to make reference to that paper. The essay draws attention to the possibility of reading video narrative as serious cultural creations, referring to the ways they defined urban culture in Nigeria in the 1990s and well into the 2000s. Before the publication of this essay, there were only reviews and short newspaper articles in Nigerian newspapers, most of them unflattering about the video phenomenon. The university class was particularly vehement about the nonsense called Nigerian video film. And I have done I have a lot of clips about this, which I'm going to be referring to some other time, somewhere, someplace in the world. But I do recall the difficulty of trying to teach Nollywood at the University of Calabar at this time, because it was not considered something worth teaching at the university. But this essay, at least to some academics, some university teachers, brought something different to the idea of the Nollywood film. It changed, for me at least, it changed the geography of Nollywood studies in very radical ways. But the genealogy of this essay began 3 years before, when I convened the first conference, and I still think it is the first. I haven't read about any other conference before this. The first conference on video films at the Waliwa Hall, the University of Bayreuth in Germany. This was sometime, I'm not too sure about the date now. I'm growing old now, you know. But it was the first conference. I think it was in 1994 or thereabouts, or 1996, at the University of Bayreuth in Germany. Jonathan Haynes was a key figure at that meeting. He also contributed to the special issue of post-colonial text devoted to the papers collected from that meeting. As many of you now know, his contribution at that meeting, Video Boom Nigeria and Ghana, announced the subcontinental significance of the video film culture with such clarity that no other scholar have done, at least in that respect, up till this point. Morade, who is sharing this particular panel today, also contributed, even though she was not at that conference. But her paper was really, really different and very, very, very great that I had to use it. And I still refer that paper to my students today who want to know how circulation of popular media, how they circulate. I still make my student read this paper because I consider it very, very important. And sometimes I wonder why it hasn't really caught on with others, because as far as I can tell too, this paper was the first dealing with Nollywood that related very clearly to this idea of circulation, especially circulation of cultural material from small countries, small media countries to big media outlets. Since 1998, Jonathan has been active, especially at Nigerian conferences, at Nollywood conferences in Nigeria. I'll just mention one, and I'll mention this one because it's important to the immense contribution that I think he's done in respect, not just of the scholarship, but in terms of making others aware of the possibilities in this area of this field of study. In 2011, in collaboration with Professor Biakolo of the Pan-African University, I co-convened the Nollywood in Africa in Nollywood Conference. The theme recognized, and rightly so, the continental reach of Nollywood at that time. A little less than 20 years after Living in Bondage was released, it was, and I wanted it to be, a gathering of the usual suspects, to use that cliche, right? Jane Bryce was there, John McCall was there, and the late Frank Ukadeke, well, my former teacher, by the way, was all there. As Morade will make clear at the beginning of this panel also, it was not just talk about Nollywood. It was eating and drinking and listening to music. Of course, John Haynes was there too. I cannot recall who did, but it was at that conference that the term Nollywood study was used for the first time. I tried really hard to think through that and to find out exactly who did, but I just cannot. But I remember that it was here that that term was used for the first time. I do want to spend 1 minute to talk a little bit about this 2001 conference and the importance. It was after this conference that the Nollywood Studies Center was set up. Because one of the things that Biakolo wanted me to do was to help set up a place when I made a proposition to him that it is important that we begin something lasting somewhere that we could all study Nollywood within Lagos. Because unlike the complaint by people like, I'm trying to remember his name now, the popular scholar who wrote on Onitsha market literature, Obiechina, right? Obiechina. His complaint was that, you see, they left the Onitsha market pamphlet to outsiders to study. I sympathized with that, and I still do. But I also believe that studying a cultural phenomenon should not also remain just with the local population. Others will come, but the study from the local centers should be very important. The reason for proposing a Nollywood center, therefore, at the Pan-African University was primarily to do this. So far, it's doing this. It's creating avenues for people to speak about, for filmmakers within the industry to come out to speak about these things. It was not just my idea at all. It was an idea that came out of the many evenings of Johnny Lee Hooker and whiskey and beer. It was those good, very good lazy days. This, in short, it's one of the, of course, after that, there was almost immediately, there was another conference that I co-convened with another colleague at the University of Lagos. And there were so many conferences, like this after that, right? Because we wanted to create this. And the other result, of course, was that then the Nollywood Center was also, Kwara State University then asked me if it was possible to set up a Nollywood Center. Of course, I was very willing to do that. And another center was set up there. It wasn't that it wasn't successful, or at least not as successful as the center at Pan-African University. But the general idea was to begin the study of this local production, this local art form, seriously, from within the boundaries of the country where the productions were taking place. But this is the briefest sketch of Jonathan's Haynes' deep connection to the making of Nollywood and the making of Nollywood scholarship that I can give. Some of them I don't want to give, others I will keep, because it's important that we keep, as one confederates to the other, it's important that we keep some of these things as private as possible. His book.
So, oh no, your time is up. So,
so I just take 1 minute now. His book, The Creation of Nigerian Film Genres, tells more than I can do in terms of his scholarship. Finally, John's work is not the work of an outsider. I can say that with confidence. His work is informed by the inside, because it's part of the inside, which makes it even more interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ono, for that history. I let you go on a little bit longer because you have firsthand details.
And I have to run.
First row. For many things, which the rest of us were not present, So this is our opportunity to know what happened. At least to know part of what happened. As you said, there are certain things which have been kept secret between Confederates, and maybe between you and John, you'll decide on a time to release that information to the rest of us.
It's not me and John, right? There is nothing really secret between that.
But thank you so much for kind of like shedding light on some of the beginnings of Nollywood. We have about 20 minutes left. If there are people who have questions, and comments they would like to make, I see there's some questions and comments, and maybe the members of the panel would like to respond to them. I think one kind of connection that I didn't make when Falakemi finished speaking, connecting to Brian Lockey, because Brian, you were talking about what kinds of political critique should be made of, film and media, and Falakemi was bringing a different kind of critique about, the epic and its lack of accuracy and its lack of historicity. So while you were coming at it from slightly different angles, you were both talking about how do we engage these kinds of cultural productions, and how do we what kinds of critiques are possible or not possible, or should be allowed, or should not be followed up on. So I think that I welcome members of the audience to share their own questions and comments, but that's certainly something that we might want to discuss a little bit further. And it's also possible that John has some thoughts about a few things that have been said. He probably has a lot of thoughts about what has been said, actually. So I don't know, John, whether you want to say anything right now or you want to wait a little bit to say something. I can see you're working on your laptop, so maybe you want to say something right now.
Well, I'm just unmuting myself to say that's up to you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would like to say something, briefly, but doesn't need to be now.
Oh,
as
okay.
You like.
Well, please go ahead. Say, you know, you are the guest of honor. We're here to honor your great accomplishments. So please go ahead and say what you have before we get into all the other kinds of confrontations and discussions we want to get into.
You know, the main thing I have to say is you're looking at a happy man. I mean, you know, most people don't get what they deserve, and I feel like I've been getting considerably more than that. My favorite part of the panel has been the same as my favorite part of the last 30 years of my career, which was the, you know, the congeniality, the collegiality that I found all along the way. And again, that really started with my meeting with Anno in, you know, that it was 1992, I think, or even late 1991. I was quite new in Nigeria. I didn't know anybody connected to film, Nigerian film, or that world at all. Of course, Nollywood did not yet exist, but it was Anno who, you know, introduced me to Nigerian film criticism as it then was, and opened lots and lots of doors for me. So, you know, and I have to pay tribute also to the, I mean, he was talking about our lazy evenings of conversation, but they were, I remember he took me, when I was visiting Ibadan, I don't know, or 93 maybe, and he took me to meet Femi Ashofiso. And, you know, after some chatting at the appropriate moment, Femi asked me what my mission was there. And I didn't know what to say. I mean, at that point, again, Nollywood barely existed. I didn't know that would become my destiny. And I was interested in all kinds of things. My journal from those years is contains some sort of stressing about the fact that I hadn't figured out what my research project was. So all you know, what I didn't know what to say. I spoke the truth to Femi Ashofiso. I said I'd come to Ibadan to drink beer with Harry Garaba. And he obviously thought this was a very odd response, but I think he also understood the wisdom in it. I've never learned more and enjoyed learning more than when drinking beer with Harry Garaba. And it was actually Anno at our first meeting. Within minutes of meeting him, he took me to meet Harry. You know, I think understanding that that was about the biggest gift he could give to a person. So, you know, it's those relationships, those conversations were there from the beginning and were just a delight. And, you know, that's persisted through this whole long, wonderful period of my life. So, you know, thank you to everybody. And again, I don't know how to thank you on this panel, and this whole thing is kind of overwhelming, and I hope it comes to all of you in your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Your words are much appreciated. I'm going to ask the panelists to look at the chat. There are a couple of questions there. Some of the questions are more targeted towards specific speakers, but I think all of the speakers are welcome to respond to these questions. We have a number of questions on the epic. We have a question about a possible museum. Ono spoke about this first article, Evolving Popular Media, Nigerian Video Films. And that title could still be used for Nigerian, you know, screen media today, evolving. It just continues to evolve in different directions. So I don't know who wants to start among the speakers as you've looked at the questions to see which ones you think you would be able to respond to and how you would like to respond. And if you don't, I'm going to start calling on people to to respond. Ono, there was a question from James Yaku. Do you want to respond to that? I hope you're still there. I don't know whether Ono is still there. I mean, he's still signed on, but he may not be there.
I'm still here. Yeah. Can you just put any question, because I got to run now. I should have apologized because I'm on another panel with the LSA too, so I have to run to do that. It's a dress rehearsal about something, right?
Yeah.
So what was the question again?
James says, I wonder the role of digital technologies and digital archives in the historiographic process of preserving Nollywood. What can, for instance, a Nollywood museum, both a physical and digital, contribute to that kind of scholarship?
It's very, very important to preserve. Of course, the digital world contributed a lot to the making of Nollywood. There's no doubt. I think this is something that everybody agrees about. And it's very important. Actually, sometime in the late 1990s, we started collecting old VHS cassettes and CDs and whatever for the University of Bayreuth, because nobody else could take it. And it's all digitized now. So if you want to actually study early Nollywood film, the place to go will be the Iwalewa House, University of Bayreuth, because I also felt at that time, unlike my colleagues who thought that this was a cultural, this was another form of cultural capitalism or cultural colonialism. I didn't feel that way, and I still don't today. I do feel that if it is possible to preserve this document somewhere outside of Africa, outside of Nigeria, where anybody could go and study them, then this is a great thing to do. And I know firsthand, because I write on the Jamaican literature. There is nowhere in Nigeria, no university in Nigeria where you find on the Jamaican literature, none. But in my university, which is at the middle of nowhere, University of Alberta, Canada, they have over 200 copies of Onitshamaka literature. So if you want to study Onitshamaka literature, you have to go there. It's better to have somewhere to put them, other than, like make them disappear. And so this is my attitude to this is that it is very, very important we preserve them. And we should preserve them anywhere there is the facility to do that. The Nigerian Film Corporation, which I'm closely connected to, the archives there, I'm told it's in a very rotten shape. Nothing's happening there, right? You cannot preserve anything there. So you still have to take this film somewhere if you want a certain sense of continuity in terms of the historiography of African cinema. That's the fact, and that's the truth. We cannot run away from that. Whether it's cultural nationalism, I don't know, but even if it is, I don't care. It has to be kept somewhere. Thank you. And Morado, let me apologize to all of you. I got to go. Thank you very much for inviting me, right?
Thank you, Ono. We do understand. Let's continue with our conversation. Falakemi, there are a number of questions about the distinction that you're trying to draw between the historical film and the epic, and perhaps you have some thoughts about that, and perhaps other members of the panel have some thoughts about that. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. It's quite interesting to see a lot of what will I call it now? Interventions from the members of the audience. Making distinctions between the epic film and the historical film, I agree, it's quite trickish. But the main thing is that the epic film is saying that a film about the past may engage the history or may not. You understand? So I am now saying that the historical film compulsorily has to engage the subject of history. It has to engage, it has to make conscious efforts to look at what is available and in the history and present it. So there has to be a compulsory dialogue between history and film. Yes, we know it is fiction, yes, but you cannot give us anachronistic, elements and call it the truth. Like Bralakin said, and you pointed out, we can't just accept anything and everything as, what should be. So that's why I'm making these distinctions. I don't know whether I'm able to answer the question. I don't know.
Thank you very much. Well, I didn't ask the question, but I think other members of the panel may want to jump in here, because I think there's a lot about, and it goes to part of what Brian said. How do we engage in critique? And popular culture, by its nature, is a protean object, and it's a very slippery object, especially commercial popular culture. So to what extent are we able to prescribe what will and should happen in the domain of commercial popular culture? Obviously, being at the National Film Institute, Folakem is in a different position. Maybe she does get to prescribe, or like the rest of us who just get to consume. I don't know. So I welcome the thoughts of other members of the panel. I see Alessandro, you'd like to say something.
I just jump in, but I find it interesting the way in which all the presentations somehow underline the issue of time and historicity in a way, in different ways. But I think Brian and Ono's points are very interconnected, because we need a sort of history of Nollywood studies to appreciate how a number of issues have become cyclical, and it is important to also look at how John, Ono, others, Brian, were looking at those issues 20 years ago, and how meaningful their analysis can be to see and interpret what is going on today. Because indeed, history, of course, evolves, but also repeats itself cyclically. And in that sense, also looking at how Nollywood itself and films represent that history is very interesting. So also there's whole issue about how film tell us about history is central. I agree with you that I'm definitely not in a position of wanting to say how they should, but I think we always need to be careful in looking at films and considering them as documents rather than as objective representation of reality. And so they are documents of maybe individual and collective feelings at certain periods in history, and how, and of course they do shape collective ways of understanding the present. So in that sense, of course, they're important, but there is no film that can be objective, I guess. So even if the example you were making about Tunde Kelani's conscious manipulation of history, well, that is true for also the most serious documentary film about historical facts that also manipulate history in one way or another. So that is also part of what, as audience, we need to be aware. And I think Nollywood has been doing a lot of, in terms of educating its own audience, that maybe was more, maybe it's not the right term, but anyway, maybe more naive back then. And now it's so conscious about all these aspects, and Nollywood audiences can and are able to criticize and see what is true, what is not, what speaks to them and what doesn't. So, but I mean, it is just 3 words. I don't have more to add.
Brian, you want to say something about this? And I have something to say about this too.
Yeah, just taking a different direction. You know, and this is outside of Nollywood, you know, because I teach this class on Indian and Nigerian film, and I like Indian and Nigerian film. I look comparatively a lot, and I'm very taken with the politics, not so much in Nigerian film, so much to say Turkish dramas and Indian epics, where there's this very self-conscious return to the past, and certainly in the case of India, to a Hindutva past. So you have films like Padmavat, in which the Muslim presence is almost like an invader presence, and I'm interested in the production of these historical epics. So on the Turkish side, it's oftentimes about the glory of the Ottomans, in one way or the other, and how the Ottomans can be, I don't know if anyone's seen this one, Ertugrul, which is a sort of the sense of the natural emergence of the leaders of the Muslim world should be Ottoman. So it's a certain ideological version of history. India is, as many places do, playing this out very differently. There's this film out now, RRR, which is made by the guy who did Bahubali. I don't know if anyone watches Bollywood films anymore, but all of which are returning to the past in complicated ways. And RRR, in an interesting way, is it's against the British and British imperialism, but it returns the fact that Muslims and Hindus were together in this anti-colonial moment. So there's a way in which the production of, whether it's historical, whether it's epic, how we understand it, what use it's been put to, how is this playing out? I personally feel, living in America, coming from England, we're in the midst of this ethno-nationalist revival. I think Brexit is a big part of that. I think Trump is a big part of that. And so there's this tendency in some of these towards a return to an older purity, which I'm very wary of. So in just generally, which is again, not so much about the Nigerian epics, which is, it's a long genre, and we have Hausa ones as well as Yoruba ones, but collectively or comparatively, to put these into conversation with each other, to see what work they're doing and the sort of differences and alliances. I think that's an interesting way, because I do think there's something about the particular nature of the historical epic, certainly in Turkish media and in Indian media, which is really being animated now. And a lot of cultural struggle is being fought out in these films as people try and put out different versions of what that past is for the contemporary moment.
Thank you very much to all of you. We're almost running out of time. I'll just read out one question that we have in the Q&A for Nollywood researchers, because these are important questions. Stephen Anu Adis Somoye asks, is there existing research or plan to explore audience reception of paranormal depictions in Nollywood films? That's a huge thing, you know, the whole supernatural horror fantasy in Nollywood, occult. And then also considering the neo-Nollywood, why should we continue with the term Nollywood video film and not Nollywood film? Those are important questions. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. In fact, we're virtually out of time, so we won't be able to respond to this. But these are questions that should form the basis for a good solid article or 2 or 3 or 4. And I think this is what we get from these panels celebrating John Haynes, an opportunity to air the next set of questions that we will be debating in Nollywood studies. I think this is what we're learning. The only piece I wanted to add to the whole debate about history is that in my teaching at the University of California, I realized that what the majority of my students know about American history comes from Hollywood. That's where they're, you know, that's where they learn their history. So this is not peculiar to Nigeria, that we are learning our history correctly or incorrectly from our popular culture creations. To everyone, thank you. To the panelists, thank you. To the audience, wonderful panel. Take care and be sure to turn up for the next panel, the second one in the series of 3. Bye-bye.
Bye.